What's up YouTube, Capital G here talking new Yosenjus in this video, and man, this deck is absolutely nuts. There are about 3 or 4 cards that are going to be released soon that are going to make Yosenju a much better deck, probably even better than when the deck first came out in the Secret Forces about last February. This is actually a build coming out of the OCG. It won an event over there. We don't know anything about the event. We don't know how many people were there. We don't know who the pilot was. Maybe Yu-Gi-Oh! Or excuse me, maybe YGO organization will update their article later, but we do have the full build, and I do want to explain some of these choices. I know people are instantly off the bat going to say, yo, Cap, well, we can't run 3 Macro Cosmos and Solemn Judgment and Feather Duster, man, so the deck's not going to translate. I get that, but we can substitute cards, and the general concept of the deck is going to pretty much stay the same. So for starters, we have known for a few weeks about a card like Rippling Mirror Force, which is going to greatly benefit Yosenjus. I think it's going to benefit Yosenjus and Cyframes more than any decks in the game, because you inherently don't have monsters on the board during your opponent's turn, because Yosenjus are kind of like spirits. They bounce to your hand all the time during your end phase, and it used to be like, you know, that was kind of like one of the big Achilles heels of the deck, is you never really had any field presence when it comes to monsters during your opponent's turn, but now that's kind of like a benefit to your deck, because now anytime your opponent attacks with a monster, they have to think in the back of their head like, shit, does he have a Rippling Mirror Force? You know, should I put monsters in defense mode? Am I risking losing the game here? Think about it like this. If your opponent pendulum summoned, and let's just say they didn't even do their extra deck plays, they just said, all right, let's go YOLO, let's just attack, or, you know, they made like their King of the Pharaoh Imps and their Nat Beasts and all this other garbage, and they just went and they attacked, and they ran into like a Rippling Mirror Force, this would be essentially the same result as something like Time Space Trap Hole, but it would be even better. Not only would you spin all their monsters, but you'd get their battle phase, and you wouldn't take any life points. Like, this card is going to be nuts for Yosenjus, and as predicted by me, you, everybody, I'm not taking any credit for this, you see Yosenju players are automatically running 3 copies of this card because it's just it's the tits in the deck. The next card is Card of Demise. This card is really good in the deck. This comes out in the Millennium Pack that's going to be released in April, which I believe, I'm thinking Shining Victories is going to be April too. It's going to be like April, Marchish. I think it's going to be April. So these cards will actually be coming out right about the same time. Card of Demise says draw until you have 3 cards in your hand. Also, send your entire hand to the graveyard during the end phase. For the rest of the turn, your opponent takes no damage. You can only activate 1 card of Demise per turn. You cannot special summon monsters during the turn that you activate. Yes, I know people are going to be like, yo, that has so many different restrictions on it. It's not even that good. It isn't that good except in a couple of decks. This is one of those decks. Like, it's good in this deck because you got to think, oh, you can't special summon? Do Yosenju special summon anyway? Like, they don't. The only time you really see Yosenju special summon is when it's like Cowboy for Game or something like that. This is a deck that has main deck 3 pot of dualities since the beginning of the deck's conception. So they don't really special summon anyways. So that's really not a big deal. The not being able to do any damage that turn, that's not that relevant either, because the only thing that you get out of damage other than, well, potentially winning, is you get to obviously proc something like Comma 3's effect. But you have to remember, even if you can't do damage, you can still activate Comma 1. So if your opponent has like a Mighty Dynastor or something like that on the field, you can easily just spin a lot of, like, you can spin their cards anyways, so you can still make advantage even if you don't get your battle phase. And then people might say, well, Cap, doesn't this kind of conflict with the fact that your Yosenjus will go back to your hand when you have to discard them and then you lose basically all your monsters? No, all you have to do is make sure that you resolve this before resolving your Yosenjus, and you'll be perfectly fine. You got to think of it like this: since you are the turn player during the end phase, you are the one who gets to choose how cards actually resolve. So here's a situation that'll put this into context. Let's say that your opponent knows you're playing Yosenjus. It's game 2, right? So they're gonna make you go first because Yosenjus have a pretty weak like turn 1 if they're going first, because you don't get anything out of summoning your monsters. Well, now you actually do, right? So here's what you do. Let's say you open up with Comma 1, Comma 2, 2 traps, and Card of Demise. Like, that's a pretty decent opening and a pretty like believable opening. Okay, so you'd set your traps, maybe like a Solemn, Notice, and a Torrential or something like that. Then you would summon your 2 commas, you'd summon them both on the field, and then you'd activate card demise. Now you have 0 cards in your hand, so you would draw 3 cards. So you got 3 cards for 1 card. It's an automatic +2, and then whatever you drew, let it be a trap or a spell, you just set it on the board. If it happens to be one of your scales, you just put it on the field too. The only time you'd actually have to discard is if you drew one of your commas, but anything else you just put on the board. Or power duality, you probably wouldn't activate duality because there is a small chance you could end up, milling 3 monsters, and that wouldn't be good. But anything you draw, you just put on the board. Then during your end phase, you say resolve card demise. I'm going to discard my hand, which is nothing. And then I'm going to resolve my commas, put them back in my hand. Bada bing, bada boom. You just went +2 for no reason at all. And since you didn't get, you weren't going to get a battle phase anyway, so it really wasn't that big of a deal. It's the same exact concept that Cleafort players used when they were running Cleafort Turbos. You guys know how they used to run Into the Void, but they also ran Monolith. It didn't conflict because what they would do was they would set everything on the field and they would tribute their 3 Clee monsters to summon towers, take a card out of their opponent's hand, and then it would say resolve card of resolve Into the Void. They discard their hand, which was 0, and then they would say resolve Monolith, and they draw 3 cards. So as long as you resolve them in the right order, you're perfectly fine. Now let's get to the point, or the part that a lot of people are going to point out, the fact that we don't have things like Feather Duster and 3 Torrentials and 3 Solemns. And yeah, 3 Torrentials plus 3 macros is fucking convenient. I'm not gonna lie. There's no beating around that. That would be a Pendulum deck's worst nightmare, because as long as you have macro up, anytime they summon anything, they're at serious risk of losing any of their shit. Not to mention that if they played things like Lizard Draw and things that pop their own skills, like Luster Pendulum, they would just kind of get fucked because their cards wouldn't go to the graveyard. But you can substitute, a Deep Fissure. You can substitute a Deep Fissure for, a Macro Cosmos that does stop hand traps like Effect Veiler, which are kind of annoying when you're playing Yosenju. It does essentially stop the summon monsters from going to the graveyard, monsters that are on the field. You could easily substitute something like Solemn Judgment for Solemn Strike. You can probably, swap out like a Torrential for a Bottomless or something like that. And, this guy didn't run Lose One Turn, which a lot of people in the TCG run Lose One Turn. And Yosenju's, because we've already established Power Duality at max, this deck doesn't special summon, and with Cards of Demise or Card of Demise, you're not going to special summon pretty much ever anyways. Now, another reason this deck is really, really solid, and another card that it's taking, it's really helping this deck out, is this card right here, Drifting Ghost and Water Blossom. This is coming out, Winter Blossom. This card is coming out in Shining Victories, and you're already seeing it have a huge impact in the OCG. And the reason it works in Yosenju's better than just about any other deck that you can think of is Yosenju's don't need their extra deck at all. The only deck that needs an extra deck less is Monarchs, where they don't even run extra decks. But, there's nothing stopping Yosenju's from splashing in a Dante or a Darklaw, waiting for their opponent to summon a Graph, then summon, any other random monster, or summon that Tour Guide. Obviously make it pretty obvious you're playing Burning Abyss, and then you can just flip this card over, you can discard it, and then you can banish all 3 of their Dantes. Have fun trying to win the duel against this deck without using any Dantes. You do the same thing to hero players. Wait for them to activate Mass Change, banish all 3 copies of their Darklaw. You can do the same thing to DDDs when they activate their, Swamp King contract. Just banish all their good shit, the cards that you don't even need. I mean, for the most part, a deck like Yosenju's, all you really need is Cowboy, Cowboy, Castell, and Lightning Chidori. You don't really need anything else. Maybe you could argue that you need Dweller, but for the most part, you don't need any of these other cards. These are just free space for you for the most part. So you could obviously do the same thing with Ptolemaeus. You can let your opponent go into Cybernova, and then you can banish Infinity. Then they're stuck with a shitty ass Cybernova. You can just bounce that shit with comma 1. So I'm looking at this deck and I'm like, yo, in a few months, this deck might actually be pretty legitimate. Now, as for him running the Huge Revolution is over, that'll be kind of up to you, because in the OCG they do have Feather Duster, they do have Torrential Tribute at 3, but in the TCG we've got Pendulum Sorcerer, we have Wavering Eyes, so there are still some cards that you can just hit in Pepe. If you're playing against Monarchs and they activate Karaz, you can hit that. So they're actually legitimate targets, as we did a discussion on Huge Revolution is over, that you can hit, outside of things like Feather Duster and Torrential Tribute and whatnot. So I'm looking at this deck and I'm like, yo, this might actually be pretty legitimate because of a lot of the new cards. This is going to benefit the deck a lot. This is going to benefit the deck a lot. This is going to benefit the deck. It's like a lot of these cards coming out in Shiny Victories and the Millennial Park, like some of the best cards are going to benefit a deck like Yosenju more than any. A deck that doesn't need to special summon pretty much ever, and a deck that doesn't really need its extra deck. Yosenjus have the benefit of those two things, and again, since you really don't have monsters on field, you can obviously capitalize more than any outside of side frames on a card like Rippling Mirror Force. So let me know what you guys think, and if you have any interest in picking up Yosenju stuff or playing this deck, I'd say pick up this stuff now because Yosenjus have never actually been reprinted. By the time that these sets come out, Yosenjus will be essentially like they would have been out for a year without reprint. So, you know, these cards could obviously go to like $5 cards. So let me know what you guys think. Thank you for watching as always.